Today we're going to be talking about the topic of biodiversity. And so biodiversity is really kind of a shortened version of biological diversity. So we're going to just take the term biodiversity here, okay, and we can really break it into two words, bio, which is our prefix, and then diversity. And bio we've defined before, but bio or bios means life, and diversity means variety. So we're talking about the variety of life that we find on Earth. Okay, so we're talking about ranging from unicellular organisms like bacteria and protists. We're talking about fungi and all the different forms of fungi that we have, plants, fishes, birds, reptiles, mammals, things that fly, things that swim, things that do all the different things that we can and cannot see. That is biodiversity. And it's because of biodiversity that we have so many successful ecosystems, because all these animals and all these plants doing these different things makes each ecosystem that much more stable. Okay, so having a wide range of organisms, if a group of organisms aren't, let's say, doing so well and they're not being successful, then we have a whole nother group over here which are doing something completely different. And so this group may go extinct and this group may thrive and flourish, right? So if one group is trying to obtain a resource by crawling along the ground and they go extinct, this other group now that can fly may benefit from that. So the variety of life just kind of continues to perpetuate more life. Within biodiversity, we can kind of break it down into three different groups of diversity, if you will. And so the first group is kind of the one that I already mentioned, the diversity of species. We have all these different species of animals, all these different species of plants. If you look at insects alone, right, we've identified close to 1 million different kinds of insects, and depending on who you talk to, ecologists believe that there's much more to be found out there, right? There's parts of the world where we haven't even really explored and kind of identified a lot of these insects. So the great variance that we see between species, right? The insects of the world, the fishes of the ocean, okay? All of those organisms are greatly diversified. Another area where we can look at the diversity is the diversity of ecosystems, right? We have ecosystems that are extremely cold and barren and devoid of most of the resources that would be necessary for life, and yet we still find life there, right, in Antarctica. And then we have areas that are very moderate with 4 seasons and gradual temperature changes and those types of things, and we have animals and plants living there. And then we have areas where they receive tremendous amounts of rain or tremendous amounts of snow, whatever the precipitation may be, and yet we still find life there. So this diversity of ecosystems that we see throughout the world, right? Based on the location, how close is it to the equator, what's the elevation, all of these things play a factor in creating these unique ecosystems that we find throughout the world. And then the last, and probably one of the most diverse of the group of 3, would be the diversity of genes. Even if we're looking at members of the same species, we see a huge variety and change from one individual to the next. If you think about the human population, right, close to 7 billion people on the planet, the only people that are identical are people that are identical twins, okay, or if there happen to be triplets or even higher. But for the most part, nobody else is identical, right? There may be people that are like you, and you may have someone that even looks exactly like you. But if we were to dive inside and start looking at your genetics, we would see that there's a lot of differences, right? One of you may be allergic to milk, the other one's not. One of you may have seasonal allergies, the other one may not. Your blood types are going to be different. Your response to the sun is going to be different. All of those things are going to be different because of our genes. And we're all members of the same species, right? 99.9% of our genes are the same, but just those subtle little differences, which creates a huge variance within our population. And as we've discussed, variance in population or genetic variation is the key to survival, no matter what your species is. The more varied you can be, the more likely you are to survive climatic changes and any really type of changes that occur within an ecosystem. So Biodiversity, that's kind of what it is. So is biodiversity, is it good? Is it bad? I've already mentioned it's good for most species and it's good for the ecosystems themselves. But specifically, if we look at ourselves as humans, there are a lot of benefits that biodiversity gives us. Most of the products, or I would say all the products that we consume for both food and drink are a result of biodiversity. The water that we drink, right, is provided by ecosystems. It's bringing that water back to us through rivers and streams and things like that, and points where we can access it, and then we bring it back and purify it and get it into our water supply. But there's not a lot of natural water for purification systems as well. But the food that we eat, whether it's crops that we're growing, animals that we're hunting, whatever the case may be, that's a result of biodiversity. The clothing that we wear, most of the clothing that we wear has its roots in some type of natural fiber. Okay. Now we have a lot of synthetic fibers and things like that, but even those at their core have a little bit of cotton, have a little bit of natural fibers in them. Okay. Fuel. The fuel that we use for most of our the things that we do, okay, whether it's natural gas, whether it's some form of petroleum and gas or oil, those are brought to us because of the processes that are happening in ecosystems, right? We're taking organic matter, it's being put below ground, it's being exposed to high levels of pressure, and then, several million years later, we now have these fossil fuels. That's because of biodiversity. Several of the medicines that we use to treat a variety of conditions and ailments are derived directly from natural ecosystems. A lot of the drugs that we are currently using right now in the fight against cancer are only found in certain parts of the rainforest throughout the world. Okay, we have found that there are some plants there that can do some pretty amazing things, and that wouldn't be available to us if it wasn't for the variety of life that we have on Earth. And then if you think about just our industrial materials, things that we build with, right? We build structures out of wood, our homes, okay? Paper that we use every day to write on, rope, those types of things, those industrial materials, a lot of those come to us directly from the ecosystem because of the result of biodiversity, which is, just having so many different things to choose from allows us to be successful as a species, right? So we have a lot of benefits from that. In addition to the things that we actually get, we also have a lot of services that we require and that we get because of the biodiversity. The regulation of our climate. So the climate in an area is different than weather. Weather can change day to day, but climate is something that, when you're in a season, you say, oh, it's spring. And so for us, that means lots of rain and, cool mornings and hotter days and cool nights. And so the regulation of that climate, to keep that climate stable, that is something that the diversity of life within an ecosystem helps keep stable. Right? The cleaning of air and water. So, water purification, whether that's being done in a wetland, in a marsh area, whether we have organisms, at the bacterial level, the microscopic level that are helping with that. Cycling of nutrients. Okay, so getting those nutrients from deceased organisms back into the soil. If you're a farmer, you're definitely relying on these nutrients, right, to get those back into the soil to allow your crops to grow. The control of pest and potential disease-causing species. Okay, so when you think about, if you have pests that may be eating your crops, okay, then you can use other organisms that feed on those pests, or you rely on those. Like for example, if we didn't have bats. Okay, if we didn't have bats in the work that they do in a lot of parts around the world, the amount of insects that we have would be overwhelming. And most people would say that, I think there's way too many bugs anyway. But if we didn't have all the organisms that feed on bugs as part of that food chain, then the number of bugs would be even greater, and we wouldn't be able to grow any type of crop anywhere. So we have bats and we have birds and we have other, mice, all kinds of other organisms that are feeding as part of that food chain to keep those insect numbers in check. And then we also have, plants doing a number of things in addition to purifying the air and helping purify the water. Also, where plants are, especially trees, that's preventing soil erosion. So when you have, forests, they hold the dirt in place with their roots. And so if you take all those trees out, then you start to see a lot of soil moving around and eroding. And that causes a lot of problems for a lot of different situations. You start to have dust bowls if it gets incredibly dry. If it gets incredibly wet, then you're experiencing mudslides. So all of these things working together provide a lot of services for us as humans. So we have the services that we get, we have the products that we get, but there are also some threats to biodiversity, and unfortunately most of these are kind of our fault, and I say our fault as human beings. The first of which would be pollution. Right, most pollution is going to be man-made. It's just through the manufacturing of products, factories running. So we're polluting the air, we're polluting the water. That makes it harder for the biodiversity that's in ecosystems to purify the water, to purify the air. Okay, because we're putting pollutants into it. Overhunting. Okay, so overhunting of certain species. Some species need to be hunted because, for example, in some areas you have animals that don't have any natural predators, and so you have legal hunting seasons and things like that. But we're talking about kind of the hunting of animals that are not in great number, and people hunting animals for sport that probably shouldn't be hunted because their numbers aren't great enough to justify a hunting season. So that's a real threat to their survival, right? And then obviously overfishing, okay, because we fish a lot of the different parts of the world. We've kind of gotten a little bit better about that now. We fish different groups of or species of fish at different times so that their numbers won't become completely depleted, right? And then we've switched to raising some fish on farms so that we can preserve the numbers that are in the ocean. Another threat would be global warming and climate change. So, some of that's man-made and some of that's just naturally occurring, and that debate will continue to go on, but those are both threats to, the biodiversity when we're taking ecosystems and kind of altering them due to the climate, due to the warming of the atmosphere. And then the spread of agriculture. So as we grow more crops for more people, we take away land that was once a grassland or that was once a forest and turn that into farmable land. And when we do that, that's again removing those trees, which increases erosion. If it's a forest, then it's taking away a habitat from those animals. If you have a group of animals living in an area and then suddenly it becomes a cornfield, you don't have nearly as many animals living in that cornfield, right? Deer may go in there and snack, but that's not where they're going to raise their young. That's not where they're going to live. So you take all those animals and you kind of displace them. So biodiversity is incredibly important. It's kind of at the heart of what we discuss in ecology, and we've seen what it can do for us, not just as humans, but as the ecosystem as a whole. And then we've also discussed what some of those potential threats are, and some of those potential threats have an impact on us as well.